Here.
Okay, here. Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
The first thing to just note is the scheduling update on any additional agenda items. Next Monday, November 1st, we have scheduled a resolution regarding road transfers with State Highway Administration and a discussion of the strategic plan and council priorities. November 8th, we'll return to our discussion of the recommendations of the Task Force on Environmental Action, and we have scheduled additional time for that to continue on November 15th. Also on the 15th, we have some special session items concerning emergency operations plans and emergency management MOUs with Montgomery County. The following Monday, the 22nd, we return to our work session discussions of the tree ordinance. We continue those on Monday, the 29th, and Monday, November 29th is the last meeting of the council before we go on recess for the month of December. I also have a mayoral proclamation that declares November Montgomery Municipal Government Works Month in the city, and we join Maryland Municipal League in proclaiming November as Government Works Month. The next item is adoption of minutes. We have minutes for July 19th and 26th. Would somebody like to move adoption?
Move. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. We now move to public comment period for anybody who'd like to comment on anything not on our regular meeting agenda. So it's anything concerning the presentation, the work session, or anything not on the agenda at all. And if you could please identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Yeah, my name's Pat Loveless, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, your peace delegate. Just wanted to let you guys know that Montgomery Peace Action is starting a campaign to ask the government to shift 25% of the Pentagon's war budget over to fund our communities so we can put it towards the use of what our cities need. There's a lot of cities throughout the country doing this. I got some information on that so you guys could hop on the bandwagon. We're trying to get each city to pass a resolution supporting this. That would be great. Montgomery Peace Action is doing a lot of work on it. The second thing I'd like to do is announce that we're having a demonstration on Saturday with John Stewart and Steve Colbert. You know, in response to the demonstration they had several weeks ago on Sarah Palin's Tea Party event they had on Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. We're going to have a response demonstration to that on Saturday starting at 12 o'clock on the mall near 3rd and 7th Street. And another thing, too, is for God's sakes, we've only got 8 more days before we vote. And I'd like to ask people, if possible, to get all your friends and stuff out there, your neighbors, your friends, your brothers and sisters, Democrats, all your peace activists, everybody come on out and vote. At least stand up and be counted, because that's part of being a responsible adult. And if you don't stand up and be voted, if you don't stand up and vote, you've got no right to complain when you don't get what you want. Part of getting what you want is standing up and speaking for it. And also, to support this resolution on the 25% shift of the war budget, be a great way of standing up to saying we are done with this bombing, we are done with this supporting this craziness, and we want our money back. We want to bring our war dollars home and bring them home now. And that's what we're asking our government to do. And I got some information on that. If you guys need it, it's right here. I don't know if I give this to Jesse or not. It's a lot of information on this here. Somebody could bring this over.
Somebody will get it from you, Pat.
All right. But the main thing is voting is coming up. Please, for God's sake, can you post a notice in the lobby of the building reminding people to vote? Can they post notices in public buildings? Because I think that might wake people up. You know, they say, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. But we can't do that, I forgot about that. And plus, they got the early voting going on now. So there should be no excuses. But if the primary is any indication of what we're up against, we're going to have problems. We might end up with Ehrlich back in office. We may end up, all the things we've worked for, gone. We cannot stand that. We've got to get up and vote. So please, get everybody to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, and yes, you're right, early voting started last Friday, so it's now possible to vote. Anybody else like to make a comment? Okay, then we will move to the presentation, which is our first agenda item, and that's a presentation on recommended improvements to the New Hampshire Avenue K6 bus. And Sarah Daines is going to introduce this item.
Joining us this evening are a number of individuals from WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Region Transit Authority, to give a presentation and provide an update on the information that they've been gathering since this spring regarding the K6 bus route. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the K6 runs along New Hampshire Avenue from basically Fort Totten north to where the FDA and the White Oak Shopping Center are located. And I'm going to turn it over to Charlie Scott, who is the Government Relations Officer in the Department of Corporate Strategy and Communications for WMATA, and James Hamry, the Director of the Office of Bus Planning. And you don't look like...
Neither of us is Charlie Scott. Charlie's over there, and Nat Boddingheimer, our Director of Planning and Joint Development, is also there. My name is James Hamry. I'm the Director of the Office of Bus Planning for MetroBus, and we very much appreciate your time and attention to this project. It's one of an entire network of improvements that we're doing across the region. I believe this is number 10 out of a network of 24 different corridors that we're looking at to make not only little tweaks of service, but actually to look at the fundamental basis of the service, see what's changed in the community, and make recommendations for what should be there today to fulfill the plans of the jurisdictions, the development, and the riders. And it's a very interactive process. To go through the details of that, I'd like to introduce Ramona Burns, who is the project manager, has been leading our meetings, our consultant, and our project planning team, and she'll go through the presentation. We're happy to answer any questions in as much detail as you would like.
Great, thanks. And welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us. Hi. As you just heard, this study involves the K6, which is a metro bus route which travels from Fort Totten Metro Rail Station up to the White Oak Shopping Center along New Hampshire Avenue. It's one of our highest ridership lines in Maryland, with almost 6,000 passengers on a weekday. Currently, frequency of the service is 10 to 15 minutes during peak travel hours and 30 minutes during other times of the day. Route's about 9 miles long and connects many major activity centers, including Langley Crossroads, the shopping center, as well as Metro Rail Station. There are many points of congestion along the route which have led to some of the delays we hope to address with this study, including at University Boulevard and at I-495. Throughout the study, we've tried to have as much public participation as possible to make sure we know what are the biggest issues we should be addressing, as well as making sure the public is informed and supports the recommendations that we're making. We started with a rider survey in April, where we hung surveys on buses and handed out surveys at bus stops asking riders about their experiences on the buses. We had 2 public meetings, one at the beginning of the study where we sort of listened to what people's concerns were, and one just recently where we asked them what they thought about some potential recommendations. And those recommendations were based on many of the concerns they had expressed to us in the beginning of the study. We've also had comment sheets, a project hotline, a website that has many of the presentation materials that we handed out, and later we'll be going to the WMATA board to ask for their support of the recommended changes. When we had the rider survey, we talked about this a little bit, we went out to the stops and actually handed out surveys, and it gave us an opportunity to let people know about the study. They were in Spanish and English. It's a way for us to start engaging folks and letting them know we're out here, we're interested in what you think, and we're going to have the study, and we hope you participate. Some of the top concerns probably won't be too surprising to anyone who's taken the K-6 before. There's a lot of concern about crowding. People felt the buses didn't come as frequently as they would like. And there's a lot of concern about schedule adherence. Buses aren't necessarily coming when people expect them to. And so we used that feedback along with what we learned at the public meetings to come up with a series of recommendations, which I'm going to talk about now. We also interviewed bus drivers as well. They often can give us a lot of good information, particularly about traffic along the route, particular points where they're held up frequently. So our first and most basic recommendation would just be to add enough service to the line to reflect what traffic conditions are right now. Over time, traffic gets worse and worse, but often our schedules aren't updated frequently enough to address that traffic. So over time, a service becomes less and less reliable if you don't put the resources into it to continually update the schedules, and that's something that's happened with the K-6. So our most basic recommendation would be, at the very least, we want to add enough resources to the route so that it can better reflect its existing schedule. So that if you're a rider and you go out to a stop, you can feel confident the bus is going to come when you expect it to. Right now, drivers are having to try and rush through the end of the route to try and stay on schedule, and it's often very difficult, particularly with all the congestion that you have on that route. Our next recommendation is for a larger investment, we could have a new service pattern on the route. And this is a service pattern that concentrates service where you need it most. We found that the largest majority of the riders are traveling between the Fort Totten Metro Rail Station and the Northwest Park Apartments. So we realized it would make sense to concentrate our resources and service in that area of the route where we have the most ridership. So in this service pattern, we would continue to have the K-6 service, which would travel all day at about 20-minute headway, so better than our current off-peak service of 30 minutes, maybe not quite as good as our current peak service of 15 minutes, but the whole thing would be at 20 minutes. And then for the portion of the route which has the majority of our riders between Fort Totten and Northwest Park, we would have what we call the K-6 cut. It would be a shorter route that would travel every 10 to 15 minutes during the peak period. So it would increase the service in that period, in that portion of the route where we really need it, and use our resources, we think, to serve the largest number of people.
Can I just get a clarification there?
Yes.
Whether you're saying you would add a different, so they would be two separate, so that one would be at 20 and one would be at 15? Or you would add enough of the cut service to bring it down to 15 in that sector?
Yeah, we'd have all day you'd have 20-minute service going all the way up and down the route. And then during the peak, so you'd have another bus that ran every 20 minutes, which would mean that a bus would come every 10 minutes on the lower portion.
Okay.
So it would effectively, so you would have a much more robust, you have a more robust service on the bottom portion of the route, trying to sort of focus our resources where the largest majority of passengers are, but still providing a solid service for everyone on the route. Another benefit sometimes of a shorter route is that it's easier to keep on schedule. You miss all the traffic at 495, and if the route is a little bit shorter, you're less likely to sort of slip as the day goes on. Okay. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit. This is a little bit more of a complex service pattern. This is called our zone limited service, and one of the things that we try to do within the our priority corridor networks is implement limited stop service where we can. And this is a recommendation that we came up with that would offer limited stop service at sort of a lower cost. The way this service would work is that we would have a service that would run between Fort Totten and White Oak, and it would run limited stop between Fort Totten and Northwest Park Apartments, and then stop at every stop during the peak hour between Northwest Park Apartments and White Oak Shopping Center. Because there are less people boarding between Northwest Park and White Oak, it didn't make sense necessarily to have a full express service for that portion of the route. During the peak hour between Fort Totten and Northwest Park Apartments, you'd have buses every 12 minutes. And you have buses every 12 minutes coming to every stop, to all the local stops, and you have buses every 20 minutes at all of the limited stops. And you also have a K6 limited, which would be every 20-minute stop. So bear with me, that's 10-minute stops. It's every 10 minutes you would have service between Fort Totten and Northwest Park, and every 20 minutes you would have a service between Northwest Park and White Oak. Essentially, it gives you the opportunity to have limited stop service in the southern portion of the route and continue to have a local service in the northern end of the route.
How do those last two things you described, are they like totally separate?
I'm sorry, this is a really complex one. Do you want to
The fundamental is that from Fort Totten to Northwest Park, you would have a bus route set there that would run all day, every day. And then during rush hour, the bus would run a second route. So you'd have layers of service. The second route would run limited stop through that portion that it shares with the local bus, and then it would run local stop. When we draw that distinction, the limited stop spacing is about every half mile between stops, sometimes a little farther, as opposed to the local bus, which stops between 4 or 5 or 6 times per mile. And that allows you to get travel time savings as well as put the service where most of the people are, which is how we would select the limited stops. So you kind of have to think of it in terms of layers of service.
Right, so I get that. So, but the previous slide described just between Fort Totten and Northwest Park, also more rapid, an increase in the number of buses that are running, and is that at the local stops?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
the one before you'd have that increased service, but all local stops.
Great.
So this would be increased service, but also with express service in the southern
And
portion.
both are happening at the same time during rush hour, is what I understand, right? Or
Yes.
peak, okay.
Yes.
Councilmember Clay, did you have a question?
I'm looking at the stop that is closest to, I'm looking at the stop that's closest to my ward, which looks to be at East-West Highway and New Hampshire Avenue. And my comment is that it's a sort of a rough bus stop. So it'd be nice to get a little better bus stop there if everyone's going to congregate there. There's a bus stop. I don't take this bus, but I know lots of neighbors who take it to get to Fort Totten, especially if there's heavy rain or snow, because the red line is slow, and at Fort Totten is where the underground starts. So they'll alter their transit pattern and take the K6 to the Fort Totten. But there's a bus stop at Larch and New Hampshire that's much nicer, in part because there's a little side street right off of it. So there's a large little island there where people can stand off the roadway a little bit. And it doesn't, when the bus stops there, it doesn't seem to have the same halting effect that it does when the bus stops right at East-West Highway. And I wonder how many people transfer from a bus route that runs along East-West Highway to get onto the K6 6, and if it would matter kind of where that was at, or if you could just back it even another block away from right at the intersection there. It's pretty crowded.
Okay, we could look into that. When we select our limited stops, they're based both on ridership, but then also on transfer locations.
Right.
One of our recommendations as I move forward, you'll see, is also improving bus stops. So that would be one of our priorities, that if a stop is ultimately selected to be a limited stop, that we would make sure that it had all the right amenities and was safe to access.
Okay, great, thanks.
And Councilmember Robinson has a question, and then maybe we'll see if we can get through more of it without questions, and we'll do them at the end, just in case they cover some of the stuff we want to ask.
Sure.
Hi. How many stops are between Eastern and Fort Totten for the local? Do you know?
Between Eastern, you know what, I don't know off the top of my head for that portion.
Okay.
I'll tell you that for the limited stop, there's only the stop at Eastern and at Fort Totten.
Right.
And anyway, and we're going to talk about the next slide, but you can actually see it illustrated on this slide. One of the other recommendations for the limited stop service is to have it run down Eastern and then Riggs Road in order to bypass the congestion that you get on New Hampshire Avenue as you're going over the bridge towards Fort Totten. So that's something that we're looking at, and one of the reasons that we're looking at that is because right now we only have the limited stops at sort of either edge in the district. That's something that we still need to work out with the district as well.
Okay.
And if I can just get a clarification on this slide, where you've got double dots at Chilham and at
East-west?
East-west.
East-west, but a single dot up at Tacoma Langley.
Let me see. Those are the limited stops, I think, just because I think it's just the way it looks on the illustration.
Okay, so it's not that it
They'll
won't
be
stop on the
matching
limited-
pairs.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you're going to let people off at Tacoma Langley on the way out. Okay.
Absolutely.
Maybe that's assuming the bus transfer station, or maybe that's why it's...
Could be, could be.
Yeah, we're anticipating the successful completion of the
Okay.
new transit center,
Okay.
where there'll just be one stop going in both directions.
Right.
Our next recommendation, and this is really where we'd like to end up, and it was definitely a recommendation that was most popular in our public meetings, is to have a full limited stop service, which would function as an additional layer on top of all the recommended local service improvements. And so we would have the local service improvements I talked about at the beginning, with a short service, with a short-term local service to Northwest Park, as well as the 20-minute all-day service to White Oak. And then on top of that, during the peak period, we would have this is a limited stop service that would go in both directions, and it would travel the full length of the route between Fort Totten and White Oak. It would operate every 10 minutes, and the really nice thing about this route is that currently about 80% of our passengers are accessing the route at one of the proposed limited stops. So this is a route that really lends itself to becoming it really lends itself to an express service, because a lot of people are already getting on at those stops. So it gives us a really good opportunity to give them a faster ride and to capture a lot of riders right at the beginning. And because it's an overlay, if you're at a limited stop, you're not at any kind of disadvantage. You'd still have the same service you have today, but if you're at an express stop, you would have this additional, faster, higher quality service. Yeah, we also have some recommended traffic-related improvements that could also give us some significant savings in terms of time. We're recommending looking at a dedicated transit lane. That would be a bus-only lane in the portion between University Boulevard and I-495. This would help the buses get around the traffic trying to enter and exit the Beltway. Could really speed things up. You're recommending implementing signal priority along the route, which is a system where a bus is approaching an intersection as a signal is about to turn red. It can send a signal to the traffic signal, asking it to extend the green time so the bus can travel through. again, increasing our travel times and making the service more appealing to our customers. We also are recommending some specific signal timing adjustments to a few intersections where right now we feel like there could be an opportunity for the intersection to run more smoothly, perhaps more green time on New Hampshire Avenue. And there are some specific intersection improvements that we would recommend, a couple in the district. And our initial estimates are that all of these enhancements could potentially reduce travel times by up to 30%. The recommendations are a little bit tricky at the beginning because clearly your savings tend to be based on how much congestion there is. But we think in a place like the section around the Beltway where you really do have a lot of delays, a bus-only lane could really give you a lot of additional savings time. So we also have some operations-related improvements that we've implemented on other lines and which can really make a big difference. The first is enhanced supervision. You don't usually see them, but we do have bus supervisors who are out in cars in our service areas, making sure that buses stay on schedule. And if buses get off schedule, they have tools to allow them to assist the drivers to maintain their schedules. They can tell one bus to go forward or hold another bus back if there's bunching. And we would recommend having a supervisor who is dedicated just to this line. And we've done this on other lines, and it can really help improve the schedule adherence of the route. They can make sure the bus is always leaving Fort Taunton at the right time, isn't speeding ahead, and helps drivers be more responsive too, and they know there's someone out there watching them. We've also done route-specific training for drivers, and we would on this route as well. So the bus drivers are really well-versed in knowing where all the transfer points are. If a rider has questions, they know how to answer them. If there are particularly difficult parts of a route, we can talk to the drivers ahead of time to make sure that they're really aware of any challenges on that particular route. Helps things run a lot more smoothly. We have heard some concerns about safety and security on the route. So that's something, again, we could work with Montgomery County to make sure there's adequate lighting or that stops are in the right place so that people feel safe waiting for the bus. And some of the other things could be surveillance, educational campaigns, encouraging police presence if there are particular stops that people feel unsafe at, things like that. Okay. And we also, as part of the Priority Corridor Network, we try to improve customer information at particular stops. Again, so we're trying to really enhance the stops and make them a really great portal to the system, including updated schedules and maps, possibly some kind of branding. We did hear requests from some of our riders that they would really like to make sure that express service is easy to see so they know it's coming. So that's something that we've done on other routes as well. And also, again, looking at where the bus stops are located. So again, if there's a bus stop that's in a dangerous location or too close to another stop, we would recommend maybe removing it or relocating stops to make sure they're in the optimal location. So next steps. We'll be finalizing the recommendations this month. And then after that, our next step is going to be to secure funding for the improvements. And that's always the key to any study, is finding the money to improve the services. And so part of that will be trying to lobby state and elected officials and trying to make sure that we can get the funding to implement the services that we think our customers really need. And then in early 2011, we'll ask the WMATA board to approve our actions. And then we'll start all the preparations for the new service. And hopefully in the fall, we can implement the new service recommendations. So do people have questions you'd like to ask?
Councilmember Wright.
In terms of the slide that has the actual, I guess you'd call them physical traffic improvements, things like the bus lanes?
Yes.
That obviously is something that involves the State Highway Administration, Maryland, right? So what's that process related to the timeline you recommended, or the recommended timeline piece? Is that also?
It would probably be a longer timeline, because obviously we don't own the road, so we work closely. We have to work closely with State Highway Department. I understand that there's also a study now looking at possible bus rapid transit lanes. So we would work again, with State Highway, with Montgomery County, to encourage them to prioritize improvements on these kinds of roads where we think there's the biggest potential to have real time savings.
And then, I guess this is also a question for Sarah. How does this relate to the charrette that was done, which has a, I forget what we title it, but between East-West Highway down to Eastern at least, which involves more of a parkway-like with the internal lanes for middle lanes for higher speed traffic and the local lanes.
Based on the feedback that we received during that process, a lot of the people that are in the immediate area, both the businesses and the residents, are very interested in expanding the bus service. So the K6 proposals in themselves support the plan. As far as the use of a boulevard, again, that's up for discussion. If that were adopted by the State Highway Administration, which does the final design and implementation of those boulevard improvements, it would not be in conflict with what's being proposed by the K6.
Including the dedicated bus lane?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I just had a quick question for the chief. Have there been any speed camera violations by buses that run by the speed camera?
I'll be honest with you, I don't think so. I don't get. I don't view the citations, and I don't think there's been a problem. I think we had a few at Ride-On, and we sent letters to them, but I don't think we've had any problem with Metro up to the state. But I will check on it to be specific.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I just wanted to add a few words to the comments that Ramona was making about the State Highway Administration. My name is Nat Bodekheimer. I'm Assistant General Manager for Planning and Joint Development, as Jim introduced earlier. One of the things that we've actually been doing, I think, quite well in the last half year is working much more closely with the State Highway Administration. Ever since the region was awarded the federal Tiger Grant to promote bus priority investments around the region, we've established regular working groups, and we've not only put these working groups together to do the problem solving for how to build these queue jumps and traffic signal prioritization investments, but we actually started looking off of the priority corridor networks to other places around the region that have not received Tiger grants yet, to start asking the question, how many buses per hour or per day go through this intersection? How much time saving could we achieve by changing the lights? We've been looking at Jones Mill Road and Wisconsin Avenue. We've been near the Naval Medical Center. We've been looking at East West Highway and 16th Street in Silver Spring. And so one of the things actually we'd like to do to help you with the advocacy of the State Highway Administration, we don't have it available at this time, is to start giving you some of these quantitative estimates of what's the business case benefit for making an intersection reconfiguration. If we could say, yeah, it'll cost $100,000 to reconfigure the intersection, but over 20 years you're going to save $500,000 or $1 million in bus operating costs, and you say, well, there's a business case for that. In addition to that, you're saving passengers time and probably improving bus ridership, which I think is a goal that everyone has. So I just wanted to let you all know that we think there's a big opportunity for making the case to State Highway about some of these improvements. We've been working closely with them. They're very receptive to that business case argument, and I think one of the things we need to do is make it possible for you to lobby out state elected officials and State Highway with a stronger base of information about what the actual quantitative benefits are for the intersections and traffic signals along this route, and we'll be trying to provide that as a supplement to the study. So just wanted to let you know that there was a follow-on to that. And then I guess just the one thing I wanted to say is that we've talked about the relationship between time savings and passenger ridership growth. Different routes have different experiences, but we've seen anywhere from 10% to 40% increases in ridership on individual routes based on the time savings that you can get of 10 to 20%. So again, it depends on whether it's a mature route like the 79 along George Avenue or a new route along Columbia Pike or Route 1 in Virginia, but there's definitely a ridership response to increasing travel speed. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I don't have any other questions. Just thanks for your diligence in looking at improving the bus service in our community.
Councilmember Schultz?
Yeah. Again, thanks for taking the time to come out here and help us understand this. My ward is along New Hampshire Avenue, and couple areas that I want to ask you questions. One's the bus shelters. We finally got some audio on my end. Should I start over?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. It's frustrating. One of my questions is the shelters. New Hampshire Avenue is a state highway. Part of the state highway runs to the city of Tacoma Park. Some of these bus shelters seem to be the responsibility of the city of Tacoma Park. Other ones seem to fall under the domain of the State Highway Administration, and yet you're the guys that run the buses and provide the service to those bus shelters so that some people have some reason to use the bus shelters rather than to get out of the way of hailstones or something. So can you sort of help me understand
Sure.
whether bus shelters are part of this plan? And then when I talk about that, I'm referring to the size of the shelters and which stops get them, or do all of them get them, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the customer facilities is a key element of our 8-element strategy with a priority corridor. Let me add yet another layer, and that's Montgomery County. They actually have the contract for the majority of shelters throughout the county with an advertising company that provides the shelter in return for providing the advertising. Working with Montgomery County, we have identified these locations, and we would be prepared to have new shelters installed at all of the stops, and they would be sized. Now, the county's moved away from having what they call mega shelters, really big ones, but certainly we can have 1 or 2 shelters at a stop depending on the demand to provide the necessary weather protection and cover. And so that would be something we would integrate with them. The great thing about that is we don't necessarily have to pay for the shelter. Because that's part of their contract, there's a self-funding mechanism, and so there's a real opportunity for doing a lot. We just have to be specific about where we want it and when we need it.
And just let me interject here, unless something's changed that I'm not aware of, the county may have that contract, but we have the contract in Tacoma Park.
That's correct. There are, well, regionally, there's 14 different jurisdictions that own bus stop shelters that we use. Here, fortunately, we only have to deal with the city and the county, and on a rare occasion, the state, and we can certainly work with them. And then, of course, we're working on the Tacoma-Langley Transit Center with everybody to try and make that happen as soon as possible.
That was my second question, but just to finish up with the shelters, you're basically saying that you're used to having this multi-jurisdictional approach to these little facilities. That I find that kind of funny. But you have my sympathy, I guess, is what all I can say.
Well, we made a strategic business decision to back away from the shelter business because nearly all the jurisdictions, Montgomery, Prince George's, the district, Fairfax, have gone to a shelter-based franchise, and they're able to provide high-quality shelters without us having to provide the public money and have to maintain them. So it really works out to be a win-win. It just complicates the coordination aspect, and that's why we do a study like this, so we can have the master plan that we then work on.
Now, with regard, thank you very much. That's actually really helpful to me, at least anyway. The bus center that's going to be built there, transfer center, that's really not in your province. I mean, that's, as I gather, that's really the responsibility of the Maryland Transit Administration. Is that not right?
Well, ultimately, I think it's going to end up being in our province. We're the majority service provider there. It's in our transit zone. We're working with the state right now to develop an operating agreement, a funding agreement, working with them on the design, making sure that all of the buses can fit, that are intended to be there, help with some of the refinement of the concepts to meet the available funding. Metro is actually providing, I think it's $6 million in funding toward the project, and so there's a vested interest. And as the Regional Transit Authority, we may ultimately be the operator of that facility on behalf of the multiple operators that are there.
Is there any indication yet? I know you're hoping to get this particular plan implemented about a year or so. I guess this plan will go forward, notwithstanding the status of that bus transit center.
That's correct.
Okay.
We can move forward on the K6 work in parallel to the transit center.
Okay.
I think I only answered 10 emails for the transit center today. It's active there in the staff level.
Good. Good to know. Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
I just want to say thank you for coming, and I really appreciate the level of detail and the thought that goes into this planning that you've done.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't spend my time thanking you for all the different things that you obviously deserve comments on. But I just, you did mention as part of your discussion that you were going to correct any safety and security issues, and that's laudable, but I would ask that if, since looking at your schedule, and it's out into next year before that'll be accomplished, if there are any safety and security concerns you have within the jurisdictional boundaries of Tacoma Park, I'd appreciate your notifying the city manager so that maybe we could take some intermediary actions to help to address those.
Absolutely, and that's one of the side benefits to a study process like that, is we get to learn who the staff is at the local level, so we can reestablish relationships where people have moved on and come together on items like that. Also, can't downplay the involvement of citizens that we've had. It's been a very good turnout. We've gotten a lot of great input, and so we're really trying to channel those people, the recommendations from folks who are using the service, and respond accordingly.
Thank you.
And I've just got one question, and if you can back up, I think it was one slide, to the express overlay.
Page. Oh.
Yes. And what struck me was up at the top of that one where you've got the piece that goes into the FDA campus. It reminded me of how, at least in my mind, I don't think physically, but in my mind, the FDA campus kind of backs up across probably some green space there to the new site of Washington Adventist Hospital. And my first thought was, ooh, can you extend that and go to the hospital? You probably can't. That's probably a different route. But I just wanted to let you know and make sure that you are aware of the concerns that the city has had in working with Washington Adventist Hospital and their relocation to make sure that there is a good connection between Tacoma Park and that campus for people to be able to get there on the bus. And if that isn't part of this K6 study, that there's close coordination between you and Adventist Healthcare about how to do that as that campus, we assume, in the relatively near future comes online.
Oh, absolutely. And, yeah, for security reasons, we can't get through the FDA campus. Ramona had worked closely with them in designing a bus transfer location for the campus to make that attractive, make transit attractive for folks. We do try and look forward as best we can envision for this study, but this isn't the last time we'll be seen up there. I think it's 18 months from now we'll be studying the Z lines, which are the US 29 corridor service, and that'll be another opportunity to come back to White Oak and look at how that all connects through there. So this is just the beginning of what we hope will be a perpetual monitoring of what's going on and responding.
Good. Thank you. I think that takes care of all the questions.
Well, thank you very much for your time and attention, and we appreciate the support. We've been very well supported by city staff, and we look forward to taking this forward and finding money in our 2012 budget to make this happen. Thank you.
And we look forward to continued cooperation with Metro so that we feel that there's better cooperative linkage going forward and planning, since some of us have longer memories than others and remember our most immediate past interactions with Metro.
Yeah, we definitely want to move forward beyond that, and I would just make a pitch. The reason the US 29 services are 18 months out is that within the next 10 months, we'll be looking at the F4, F6, and I remember seeing the bus go by here, so we'll be back working with you closely on the east-west connections as well.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll now move on to our regular meeting, and the first agenda item is the first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 14.20, to repeal obsolete sections. And again, Ms. Daines.
Good evening. Earlier this fall, on September 13th, we presented a proposal to you which dramatically altered the City Code 14-20. And what we have decided, or what has since transpired, as where we have split up the recommended amendments in two parts. This first part is, if adopted by the council, would repeal those obsolete, redundant, and other conflicting sections of the ordinance, and then we'll come back to you at a later date to amend it to allow for the establishment of administrative regulations regarding the use of the auditorium. As I noted in the past, most of the sections of this ordinance are no longer applied, no longer enforceable, or are already addressed by other state, county, city laws and regulations. And in an attempt to clarify that for you, what we've included at the back of your memorandum is a summary of the impact of the proposed amendment on those activities that are included within this chapter. And as you'll note, many of them, such as the littering, is already restricted by state law. Others regarding the storage of decaying matter, animal filth, and excrement, for example, are regulated by state agencies as well as governed by the property maintenance code that we've adopted from Montgomery County. Others, such as the obscene posters and placards, as well as begging, are considered a form of expressive conduct and are protected under the First Amendment. And others we just don't enforce, frankly. Temporary barricade permits, for example, and language regarding police officers, giving police officers permission to cordon off areas for purposes of preserving the peace. The one observation that came out of this whole discussion since we've last met was a conversation we had with the city attorney, and this was in response to the concerns regarding the begging in public streets. It's something that we have to repeal because of the First Amendment considerations, but there is a possibility of the council adopting an ordinance that prohibits aggressive behavior. And if the council wishes, we can proceed with that amendment and incorporate those more enforceable or more legal restrictions in the ordinance that may address some concerns that people have expressed regarding begging in public streets and in public right-of-ways. Are there any questions?
And maybe if I can first just get a sense right off the bat, if people are interested in adding the aggressive behavior draft, is there a sense that people want to go there? Okay, I see nods, yes, so I think we'll add that.
We'll follow up on that one.
Okay. Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the effort to clean up our code. I have an incredibly tiny question. on unnumbered page that includes 14.20.200, construction near House of Religious Worship. You have a summary there that prohibits any construction-related activity within 500 feet of a religious facility during morning workshop. And I assume you mean worship,
Yes,
but
yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay.
Spell check is a great thing, but not all the time.
it is a good thing, but...
Yeah.
yeah.
And as noted in the memorandum, that would be addressed through the city's noise ordinance.
Would somebody like to introduce this?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Sniffer, second by Councilmember Clay. Any further comments? Councilmember Wright.
I guess I'm not totally comfortable with all of these things. I get it when there's things that aren't covered by the state. I'm not sure about some of the things that are now termed to be unenforceable or obsolete in all cases. For example, where's the one about sorry. There's one about use of a rope to clear an area. So why wouldn't we want the police to be able to cordon off an area for the purpose of preserving the peace, maintaining order, and protecting life and property? Like, what's obsolete about that? That's section 4.2.230.
It was identified as being something that we just don't do. So we don't enforce the requirement. We don't have the police out for areas such as this. If I recall correctly, this is specific with theaters
No, this
and
is just...
other amusement.
No, that's a separate section. This is 4.20.230.
Under Article 4, offenses against public welfare.
Oh, okay, got it. I'll go back and discuss it with the city attorney, but it was something that she recommended deleting because it's not enforced.
And then there's another one about something about burying dead animals.
Yes, exactly at the beginning.
There's actually now people who have prohibits the deposit of bringing human or animal waste or dead animals without a permit from the council. There's people now who keep farm animals. There's like in Montgomery County, you can keep a certain number of farm animals in your backyard in Tacoma Park. There's someone along Philadelphia who does it. So I'm not sure we would want to, it doesn't seem so obsolete to me.
We don't issue permits right now. We can go back and talk to the city attorney to see if there's a more appropriate location to place that.
Anybody else? Any public comment? Okay, so it sounds like we've got at least two instances where you're going to come back with additional information before second reading. At second reading.
Can I just clarify the section for the permitting of burying dead animals?
It is
At 14.20.040.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Is that the one you were referring to?
14.20.50.050. Prohibits the deposit of burying of animals or animal waste or dead animal.
That's where it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of first reading, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have a resolution providing for the final appointment to the Tacoma Junction Task Force. Would somebody like to move that?
I'll move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, second by Councilmember Robinson. Any comments? Any public comment? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. And final item of a regular meeting, a resolution supporting a request of the Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless to purchase a 6-unit apartment building at 8316 Flower Avenue.
Sure. Can I move it?
Second.
I'd like to move it.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Clay. Ms. Daines, were you going to say a few things about this one as well?
The council is being asked to consider a resolution this evening that's required by program section 811, supportive housing for persons with disabilities. If approved, it would be included within the Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless's application for funding through the Department of Housing and Urban Development for the operation of a facility that would provide permanent, affordable rental housing to individuals with disabilities and for supportive services. I'd like to clarify that the property is already owned by the Coalition for the Homeless, and this would be to offset operating expenses and anticipated renovation costs. The property was purchased earlier this year, early last year.
A year ago.
Just a year ago this time. John Ganio is the Director of Real Estate is here. If you have any specific questions, he's with the Coalition of...
Councilmember Clay.
I just want to say that I'm fully supportive of your application and glad that you're putting it in. I used to work for the aforementioned federal agency that administers the 811 program.
That's great.
And for people who are interested in this, it is about senior and disabled housing, and it is one of the most successful of the assisted housing programs that HUD runs. And the other thing that I want to say, Sarah Daines already made the point that the group already owns this, and this is really just a question of whether or not we're supporting this partner in getting funding that will help them better run the project. It doesn't determine what the outcome of use is at this point, I think, for the building, but whether or not they actually get the funds to do the kinds of things that would make it a really top-quality project. So either way, I'm happy to support the project. The other thing I want to say is that when you go looking for money to do affordable housing across the community, the senior disabled housing is actually the easiest to place, and then the low mod housing in the 80% range. But when you get to providing housing opportunities for people who are at the 30% of area median income down to nothing, it's really difficult, and over the last decade the money for that has really gone away. So it's nice to see folks who are putting together programs for people so that everybody across the income spectrum can have a safe, decent, affordable place to live and integrate into society and be a part of our community. So thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you. Some people in my ward have had some questions about the uses of the property, and I just wanted to get it into the public record. Will this be a homeless shelter?
We would not use that term. The people are disabled. They have been in other programs of our agency typically, and they will be signing a permanent rental lease and paying rent. And so we don't use the term shelter at all. We use it as the term permanent supportive housing.
So they are not there for a few nights and then...
Absolutely not. We currently, my part of Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless has upwards of 50 other apartment units around the Montgomery County, and the demographic of the people that will be placed in the building is 8316 Flower. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. We've had people in the units as long as we've owned them. They're very, very stable, and the supportive services is really kind of the key to helping them integrate into the community. A lot of them end up taking part-time jobs, going to Montgomery College, becoming part of their community in very meaningful ways once they have the stability of a permanent home.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of this, but I have heard a number of questions from my neighbors, and I want them to be reassured about it. There is concern about the case managers. Will the case managers be living on the premises or not?
No, not necessarily.
So it will be only the residents themselves?
That's correct. It's a 6-unit apartment building, single adults only, one, no couples, one single adult per each of those apartments, and the case managers are people who work, with a variety of households around the county, so basically the case managers come in and do home visits.
I assume that the renovation made it fully accessible for these residents.
The term disability in this case, we're using the people who are going to be CMI, chronically mentally ill. They're not physically disabled. We're actually complementing it. Gets a little bit complicated in describing the whole project, but we have a condominium unit in Silver Spring that will be complemented with this for HUD's purposes to have one unit that is fully accessible for somebody with physical disabilities.
Is it, well, I can ask the question a different way. Is it considered accessible for the residents as you described them? That is, will it have the physical things that will meet their needs?
The building has already been renovated. We bought it last December. It's already been renovated. It's decent, safe, and sanitary housing in every way. It's a very nice building.
Will the residents have a method of signaling when they need assistance?
Again, these are people who have been typically in one of the other programs of our agency or one of the other agencies around Montgomery County. It's called the Continuum of Care.
Right.
The agencies who work with the homeless and disabled all think of it as just a big database. They all interact, and these folks are folks who have been judged to be capable of living independently, and our experience is very good when we place them in an apartment of their own, integrated into the community, a small building, small setting where they're integrated into the community. The success rate is just incredibly high.
Yeah, this is actually a great neighborhood because there's a lot of shopping nearby. There's pretty good bus service.
Right out front.
And
couldn't ask for better.
Yeah, yeah. And, of course, the Adventist University is just up the street, as well as the hospital. I mean, it's a pretty good location. I had some concerns about that perhaps Ms. Daines can answer concerning our rent stabilization. As I understand it, because it's it'll be funded under the 811 program, it is exempt from our rent stabilization.
The city's ordinance requires an entity like the Coalition for the Homeless to make an application to the city for an exemption from rent stabilization. It's not automatic. To qualify for an exemption, they would have to enter into an agreement with HUD in this case, which stipulates what the income limits are for individuals living within the property, and then establishes an affordable rent level for those individuals and for those specific units. So it's not automatic. They have to make an application, and the exemption would apply as long as they remained in compliance with their agreement with HUD and for the term of the agreement.
Do you anticipate at this point any problem with them gaining that exemption?
No.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Councilmember Wright.
So
That answer the question about rent stabilization. Is this project receiving any pilot exemptions, so it pays full taxes to the city?
At this stage, it pays full taxes. That's correct.
What do you mean by at this stage? Are there some future stages where it won't?
That is a question that's a little bit up in the air. We are currently in dialogue with the state authority that determines, the potential for charitable exemptions. And it's just difficult to tell which some projects go with, one way, some projects go the other. But we always, attempt to at least get a reduction in taxes.
And does the state have the authority to grant them an exemption from local property taxes there?
That's would be difficult to answer at this stage.
This is an issue that was brought to our attention by the Coalition for the Homeless. The State Attorney General's office has ruled differently than they have in the past regarding what is a charitable organization that automatically is considered exempt from state, local, and county taxes. And they're going through and discussing that with the State Attorney's office. And we're following that conversation. Is it an impact on other charitable organizations in Tacoma Park? The McLaughlin School, for example, or the Washington McLaughlin School has been placed in the same position as far as whether or not their automatic exemption from local property taxes is indeed automatic, or if they have to go through another application process.
So the state's making it harder or easier?
The state is making it more difficult for charitable organizations to get the automatic exemption.
Okay. So
they would have the option of submitting a request to the city council, and there would be a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, which then would have to meet the state requirements as far as eligibility, and would come before the city council or the county council for approval through the ordinance process. So right now, they don't get a pilot, and they haven't asked for one.
But the state could grant them one, regardless of what we wanted to do?
Correct.
Okay. My second question is, I'm supportive of this project, and you said you have about 50 units around the county that are similar, or for individuals. Obviously, they might be in a range of different disability, but...
We also have some family housing. It's a variety, but somewhere, of those 50, somewhere around 35 are for single adults.
And do you have a sense of how many of those there are in total in the county? Obviously, your organization is not the only one that provides such types.
We're the largest that is providing permanent supportive housing for people who are formerly homeless, in addition to the projects that are aimed specifically at people with a disability.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not unique. There's several other agencies that are somewhere comparable in the dozens of units. So.
And do you have a sense of how those units are distributed around the county?
They're very widely distributed. We make a specific effort to work. We don't go as far as Clarksburg. We work everywhere in the county. Generally speaking, the housing has come to us in the past as a result of the county's MPDU program, moderately priced dwelling unit program, condominiums, and generally speaking, those have been in Germantown, Rockville. This is our second project, which is notable for in Tacoma Park distressed real estate. This was a short sale. For this one, we did a 4-unit building that was a foreclosure. So with the change in the real estate market, first of all, there's fewer MPDUs coming out. Second of all, there are officials in the county as well as the city of Tacoma Park that have said, gee, this is a little bit worrisome having a building sitting vacant. This one was condemned. There were severe, the prior owner had done some very bad electrical wiring. There was flooding in the basement. It was literally a threat to the tenants, a threat to the neighbors. So the sense was, let's do something positive with this property.
Do you know if you have units in Bethesda or Potomac?
We have similar units, about 11 of them in North Bethesda, which is basically the White Flint area, condominium units. We're currently completing a project in Central Business District of Bethesda. We won't self-manage that. It'll be managed by an outside company, but we're the developer on that.
Great, thank you for your work, and again, I'm supportive of the project.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd just like to follow up on Councilmember Wright's questions. How many of your facilities do you have here within Tacoma Park?
This will be, we will have a total of 10 apartment units spread between 2 buildings.
Okay, so 2 buildings with 10 units. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, the other 4 are family. These are single adult.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any further comments. We've had it moved and seconded. Is there any public comment? Mr. Loveless.
My name is Pat Loveless, 7620 Maple Avenue. Your peace delegate. This is one of the things I love to see Tacoma Park working on, is helping the homeless and the disabled out. It shows that Tacoma Park still stands up and cares about people. And I hope you people pass this resolution unanimously. And I'd like to ask them, if possible, are they going to be opening up more shelters and stuff, and more facilities for the homeless, as well as the mentally ill homeless, and people who are about to become homeless? And I'd like to be able to see Tacoma Park leading the way on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Dr. Troy Jacobs. I live in Ward 5 as a homeowner, and as a pediatrician, I take care of many poor families. I am also supportive of this resolution, but I have to tell you that I have a lot of angst with the resolution. I believe that it actually will represent an improvement in our neighborhood. I've seen the properties around there, and I think it can be a physical improvement in the situation. What concerns me, though, is the larger context. And in our ward, compared to the other areas of Tacoma Park, the city of Tacoma Park, we have a larger proportion of poor families. We have a larger proportion of affordable housing. I was looking at this is a map from the census from 2000, and I can't imagine that this is improved with the 2010 census. But that dark green area there is our ward, and that's where there's a higher proportion of poverty. And I think about the ramifications of this in terms of our housing and what it means for our neighborhood in terms of social cohesiveness. I think that there are things that the City Council can do to improve the integration of Ward 5 with the city of Tacoma Park. And so if there are future opportunities for housing like this, I would hope to see that they are actually placed into the other wards in the city of Tacoma Park. And there are other things that we can talk about at some other point that can improve the integration of Ward 5 with the rest of the city, but I'll leave it at that for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. We will take a short break and come back for our work session discussion on speed camera fund. And we're going to have our work session discussion of speed camera fund revenue update on new cameras, and discussion of capital project expenditures. City manager's going to lead this off.
As I had mentioned, I think at a prior council meeting, thought it might be helpful just to touch base on where we are at with the speed camera fund, both from a financial standpoint as well as a capital project standpoint. Most of the funding from the speed camera program is being dedicated to capital improvements. So part of what we wanted to do is kind of give you an update on what work we have completed so far and what we envision taking place in the remainder of fiscal year 11. I think the council is aware of this, but just for the benefit of anyone in the public who is watching, we currently have 4 fixed photo radar sites. They have been operational since the spring of 2009. Specifically, we started issuing citations on April 1st of 2009. There are 2 units on New Hampshire Avenue and 2 in the 500 block of Ethan Allen. Earlier this year, the council did approve an amendment to the contract with the program operator, ACS State and Local Solutions, for 2 additional cameras. One would be on University eastbound and the other on East West Highway in the 1000 block westbound. As you may recall from that discussion, the University camera would be a portable one, and the East West Highway would be a stationary or fixed site, similar to the 4 existing ones. Chief can always provide more data if he has any updated information, but it's our understanding from ACS that the east-west camera should become operational in mid to late November, with the University camera becoming operational in early December. Just as a reminder, both of these cameras do require permits from the State Highway Administration, so it's not just a case of the city determining when they're put up. Included in the agenda packet, that might be helpful just to give you a sense of what has happened from both a revenue and expenditure standpoint. So on the second page of your agenda packet, there is a kind of a summary of both revenues and expenditures for the speed camera program. As I mentioned, for fiscal year 09, the cameras were only in effect for basically 1 quarter. In FY10, we had a full year of activity, but as a reminder, there was a change in state law that went into effect halfway through that fiscal year with the basically the threshold for issuing a citation change. Chief, I always get this wrong. I think it went from over 10 miles to over 12 miles. Is that correct?
10 to 12.
I thought it was 11 before.
Over 10
It was in
to
excess
12.
of 10 and then in excess of 12. So what we have seen is certainly, I think, just across the county, there has been, a dramatic shift in terms of what happened with the number of citations with that change in state law. I've also provided data for the first quarter FY11. As you'll note, revenues are about approximately $415,000. Those are gross revenues. I apologize, I should have probably put this in the agenda packet, but you can always just jot this down if it's of interest. The budgeted revenues were actually $963,500.
For the quarter?
That was for the entire year. So at the quarter, it's already $415,000.
Doing better than budget.
Right. So it does look like, I guess the bad news is it doesn't look like people are slowing down as much as we had probably hoped.
We're double the
Yeah.
revenues double the budget.
Yeah, we're at 415 for a quarter, and, it's basically, if that continues, the budget will be exceeded, maybe not quite double, but pretty close. And that is before the 2 new cameras come online later.
Double wide sidewalks.
Excuse me, Councilmember Stevens?
Never mind.
I did include in the packet with the chief's assistance as well as the program vendor, it's kind of the white sheet, just the statistical data, which you can just certainly look at it at your leisure. As you can probably see, there's a number of different categories. I'm trying to provide some footnotes because the chief had to kind of explain it to me, but what is categorized as an event is any time basically a camera is operated and a photo is taken. There's first a review by the vendor. They will screen out ones where, with rental cars, for example, they apparently do not give tickets. If there's 2 cars that are in a particular shot, it's hard to tell which car, triggered the camera, so that's excluded. So what you see under total violations is basically after the vendor has actually sorted through all the photographs and discarded those that it does not believe meet the standard of being a violation. By state law, everything has to be reviewed by a police officer, and the citations that are issued are after we have actually received the information from the vendor, and then one of the Tacoma Park police officers will actually review the images and make a determination whether or not a citation is actually issued. So that's probably the number you want to look at. And as you kind of cross over the line, you do see around October 1st of '09, when the new state law went into effect, it hasn't been consistent, but there was a change, basically, in the number of citations. Chief, please correct me if I'm wrong. There was also, when the work was being done on New Hampshire, obviously it was very difficult to go very fast. So that also would impact some of the citation numbers that you're seeing. Chief, is there anything else I missed that you wanted to comment on?
If you look at the numbers after the road was completed, and it's now completed, the numbers have gone up again, making it it's picked up, which is, I think, the reason that our original projections are kind of off. Obviously, there's more tickets being issued. But in looking at New Hampshire and watching it as we've been doing, and we've been running radar in other sections, the fine improvements to our road has increased the speed. Hopefully, the speed camera will reduce it once again like it did originally, but definitely with the new road, it's definitely increased the violations.
On the kind of financial activity summary, I would just note that there are several major categories of expenditures. When we first started the program, we had some overtime cost, but we really did not allocate staffing to the speed camera program in fiscal year 2009. In fiscal year 2010, we did have a police officer who was basically assigned to that program the entire year. We had some other positions that were budgeted, but actually were not filled during that fiscal year. For FY11, there are currently 3 positions that are assigned to the Speed Camera Fund. One is a police officer, there is a civilian photo enforcement analyst, and then there's a traffic officer, which was a position that the council had approved creating back in fiscal year 10. It was somewhat in response to some of the state budget issues that we were experiencing and trying to look at new ways to use the speed camera monies but maintain our police presence. Probably one of the largest expenses for the speed camera program is the vendor payment. Council may recall this, but the vendor receives $16.25 of each paid $40 citation, or there's a minimum of $2,299 per month, whichever is greater. We do also contract with the same vendor to do our ticket processing. When the program first started, it was something the county did for free. Quite frankly, I'm not sure why they did it for free, because that's not something I would have done if I were a county administrator. They then, in response, I think, probably to their own budget problems, realized that they couldn't keep providing that service for free. They had estimated, I think, Chief, it was $2 a ticket or something like that they were going to charge us. We went to ACS and were able to cut a deal for the same service for 50 cents per citation. Public safety projects are those that have been approved. Primarily, they may be capital projects, but they're not infrastructure projects. So this is buying new LiDAR units for the police department. You may remember the e-citation program you all had approved, which was a kind of electronic ticketing system. But the major reason for this work session this evening is to talk about the capital expenditures. We did not have any in the first quarter that the program was operational. We were able to get some work done in fiscal year 2010, and certainly there's a lot of work that is planned for the current fiscal year. Trying to see. Daryl, you're a little short behind the screen there. But Daryl had snuck out. But what I wanted, hopefully, for Daryl to do tonight is sort of walk through what we have done to date, and as I mentioned, what is on the work plan for the rest of this fiscal year.
Can I make a couple comments relative to those comments?
Sure. Councilmember Clay.
We need to paint the markers on New Hampshire Avenue again, where there were, don't they have white bars in the road where the speed cameras are at? They're not there anymore.
I'd have to see if they put something else in its place to help for them from the pictures.
Right. Well, I also think that it reminds people that there's a speed camera there, and reminds them to slow down. It's a visual reminder as well, and that might help people remember to slow down there, because those markers are gone. And the other thing I was going to say is I don't see why we can't send tickets to the rental cars. Is it part of the state law that you can't send the ticket to the rental car?
That's my understanding.
Lame. All right, thanks.
Rental car lobby.
And if I can just follow up on the
It doesn't cost them anything.
comment about the white bars there. My sense in driving up there today was that all of that painting is temporary. I hope that's not permanent, because it's all skewed and wiggly, and it looks like a kindergartner did it.
Well, it looks like a drunk kindergarten did
Yes.
that. It's amazingly awful.
Yeah.
The
So
East-West Highway in New
if
Hampshire.
that's permanent, we need to ask State Highway how their inspector or whoever lets that go, because it's just pitiful.
You know, it's the heat melted stuff. I can't imagine that that's temporary. It's the expensive, what do you call that heat?
Thermoplastic.
It's that.
Because every dotted line to divide a lane is off at an oblique angle.
And the crosswalks go like this.
We can certainly follow up with State Highway about that. I guess I haven't driven New Hampshire Avenue lately, so I'm not aware of it myself. It wasn't any work that we do, of course, as a state.
Right.
Yeah, you're exonerated.
All righty. On the subject of the capital work that's been going on, I'll refer to your next section of white pages there in the packet. And I'll run through this fairly quickly. I do have a few photos and a PowerPoint presentation that I can show at the end of this to try to give some visual examples. But I just wanted to run through some of our expenditures and major projects since April of 2010. I've split it up into 3 different major items for the initial part of fiscal year 2010. We started the New Hampshire Gardens traffic calming project, which included a raised crosswalk at Merwood and Glenside, and also included 3 traffic circles, 2 on Wildwood and 1 at the intersection of Kirkland and Kennewick. And they've been a slow process in getting finished, and we're not quite done yet, though we're probably at about 95%. The costs that you see there for that particular project include design and, it should say inspection, and then also construction. We're just under $100,000 at this point, though there are additional costs that we'll be anticipating receiving for the finishing of those items that include the installation of the cobblestone as well as signage and some road painting. We used the speed camera funds for any traffic calming that was approved by the council, which includes speed hump installation or replacement. So we did several of those in that time frame: Westmoreland, Lockney, Sherman, and Maple Avenue. And you see a total of about $14,000 there. We started the ADA sidewalk retrofit project in April of 2010, and we initially started with some small projects in areas where we knew we had some trip hazards. It was just a way to try to get our contractor and our inspector and our design engineer working together with us to sort of understand what the requirements were. So on the front end of that, we worked on a accessibility standard that the city has adopted, at least from a departmental level, relying largely on State Highways accessibility guidelines, and we tweaked it to meet our own requirements. So we do have guidelines that we're following when we proceed with an ADA evaluation. And then beyond that, we now have, because we've been doing this since April, a pretty good understanding with the various factors involved, 2 different contractors as well as ourselves, of how we go about and design and then install these retrofit projects. So we started on Manor Circle and Crescent and Holt Place. Then we moved into the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood. That was the first area where we sort of did a neighborhood study in specific and decided that that was a place where we could kind of contain it, work well. We had some challenges there, and we figured if we could figure out how to make it work there, we would be pretty well served for the rest of the city. Then we moved over to North Tacoma and then came back through the community center and Grant Avenue and then finally Lee Avenue. You see some of the costs that were included there between engineering and construction. We spent over $500,000. One of the things just to note, if for those of you that are into numbers, those numbers don't add up to the numbers that you see on the blue sheet in terms of capital expenditure. And that's simply a matter of billing. I included all costs that I know of that are invoiced. Those haven't necessarily been paid. So it's kind of in a part of a moving cycle. Those invoices will fairly shortly be paid, and those two bottom lines will match.
And while you're on that section, can you just say anything about the reason for the relationship of engineering and construction costs, because it's all over the place. With
it is all over the place.
Equal and Lee Avenue being quite different.
Yeah, it is all over the place. Some of it depends on the complexity of the situation and how much time our design engineer has to spend on site, both prior to the construction starting, as well as if there's requirement for bringing in additional design or engineering expertise. So it really has been all over the map. In general, we know what we spend on a monthly basis, and that's pretty much leveled out, but the actual cost for design engineering and inspection, which are the two things folded together in that contract with Whitman, Reichert and Associates, has varied depending on how long we spend in an area. Some of it is as simple as weather delays. You know, if you have 3 days of a week where you can't do any work, they don't bill for that time, and so, you know, that can alter a billing cycle as well. So we haven't been able to really find a rhyme or reason to that, other than there are some projects that are quite complex and some that are very straightforward, and so you know, some are just simpler than others to do. So that's about all I can say as way of explanation for that.
Okay.
Maybe
Councilmember Clay, did you have a question at this point?
No, I want to wait until she gets through.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just do my PowerPoint now, because that's sort of where we're talking, and then I can move to the next section, which is sort of what we're working on now and towards the future for this fiscal year. And having not done this before, I hope it'll work out. But anyway, basically, what we hope ultimately to have this information is on the city website, together with our guideline standards and our scope of services, so that this is available for anyone in the community to access if they want to know sort of what's the basis for what we're doing and some examples of what to expect when we come through their neighborhood. So again, this is just kind of a snapshot in time. And again,
Daryl, press the F5 button.
F5. Okay, thank you. This next page is basically one that you've heard before. We are working with consultants to design and oversee the work, and we actually have a construction contractor through NZI. The process that we follow is prior to the start of any work, the design engineer walks the existing sidewalk and notes deficiencies. He walks around with a level and literally measures the cross slope on every square of sidewalk that exists. And he's looking for areas that have too great a cross slope, missing curb ramps, trip hazards, broken concrete. And then he starts the design process. Some of that is, as I said, very straightforward. If a section is broken, that we replace it. The curb ramps are ones that we follow the federal and state standards through SHA for how those get designed and installed. There is a little bit of flexibility in terms of how you do your truncated dome matting and things like that, but we work those out on a case-by-case basis, and they literally are all site-specific. So once that evaluation is done, he then does the design work. I know in many cases people are surprised at some of the sidewalks that we've replaced because they're in otherwise good shape. What we've decided as a standard for ourselves is the federal guidelines require that any time you have a cross slope of 2%, you're in violation. That isn't a compliant sidewalk. If we were to implement that standard in the city, we would be removing 99% of all existing sidewalk. And when I say cross slope, I'm not meaning the grade of the street following up and down parallel to the street. I'm meaning perpendicular to the street. So with the back of the sidewalk to the front of the sidewalk, if the slope is at too great of a percent, then it becomes impassable or hazardous for those that are impaired. We've set for ourselves a standard of 5%. So basically, if a sidewalk cross slope is at close to 5%, we will replace it when we're doing the rest of the ADA work. Less than that, we're allowing it to stand in place to minimize the impact and the disruption in the areas where we are. We also add curb ramps, and there are standards that we must follow for that. And then lastly, which we've discussed at some length in the past, the city arborist is working with us, overseeing the tree protection that's required in any of these cases, and identifying areas where we need specific tree protection or alternative surfaces for the trees, which is generally brick pavers or the rubber tiles that allow for permeability and also allow less excavation, less disturbance of the soils under an area so we don't have to affect the roots. Getting to some pictures, and I don't know how well these will translate, but just going from left to right, these are some photos from the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood. The first photo you see at the far left is at the Flower Cherry. It was basically a non-existent curb ramp. There was a steep slope and a step off where the concrete had actually broken off. So you had sort of a step down to the street and crossing the Cherry Avenue entrance there. And then below it, you see the solution. We dropped the slope. We created back slopes on either side because of the grade change. And we also had to replace the storm inlet in that area, the inlet top, in order to not affect the sidewalk. So it's an area where now it's fully compliant and has access where it didn't before. In the middle of that screen, you see the intersection of Flower and Jackson. Didn't get great photos there. It's really one that you should drive through to appreciate. But basically, we established crosswalks on all those three intersecting streets. There's curb ramps at each of them, and we improved the visibility as well as the access for folks in the area. The bottom in that middle section is Garland Avenue as you're looking up from Flower Avenue. We had a situation with a very steeply sloped driveway, and it kind of bent out and around the utility poles, so we were able to flatten that out in a way that provided access. And then on the far right, it's at the intersection of Hilton and Trescott. And this is a case where we didn't have a curb ramp. And so curb ramps were installed on each of the intersections. And so in this area, you kind of get into archaeology. There was a sidewalk, a fully developed sidewalk underneath the existing sidewalk. So we had two sidewalks on top of each other in that area. So you just never know what you're going to come across. Some of the work we did at Holt and Crescent, I selected the intersection of Crescent and Holt. And what you see in those before pictures is a failing sidewalk on one side with a curb ramp in bad condition, and no curb ramp on the other side, so there was no way to access across the street. We installed the curb ramp and brought the sidewalk down in order to provide that access. And again, there's a back curb that was placed on the Holt side of that house so that it kept the slope of the property owner intact.
In that area, did we just do those two pieces, or did we also repair any other sidewalk that didn't?
We
meet
did
grade?
all the sidewalk on Holt and Crescent while we were there. So we did a full replacement of most of the sidewalk in that area,
great.
as well as some driveway aprons.
Thanks.
Yeah. We also did one of the ramps at Philly and Holt, which was in very deteriorated state. So we made a repair on that side. Next slide I have is showing our work on Lee Avenue. And Lee Avenue was primarily a sidewalk that was identified through the Safe Routes to School project, and as a missing section. We had a small missing section. So again, one of the challenges we found in doing this work is that once you enter a neighborhood, it's kind of hard to stop. So we were going to just add a little section where it was missing in front of this two apartment buildings. And of course, as our design engineer walked the sidewalk, there's all kinds of compliance issues all along the street. So we limited the project to the block. So we basically did on Lee Avenue from Hancock down to Maple Avenue. And this was the most visible section where we were able to add a sidewalk and a way to cross through the driveway aprons that provides a real visible site for walkers or strollers or pedestrians of all kinds to feel like there's a clear delineation by where they're walking. We're not completely finished on Lee Avenue. We've got some challenges with a storm inlet there a little bit further down, so we'll be coming back to do a storm inlet relocation to finally finish that project. But we ended up having to do a lot of crosswalk work across driveway aprons, and the curbs were in pretty bad shape on that side. We did do less work on the other side because that sidewalk was clearly not an ADA accessible sidewalk. There's steps and ramps. We did provide for a crosswalk across Lee and an ADA compliant ramp on the other side of this street. I guess what you would call the, getting my north, south, east, and west mixed up, the side closest to Sligo Creek Parkway. So we were able to create a ramp that would allow access to folks if they were on that side of the street to cross over and use the compliant sidewalk on this side of the street. One of the things that's been a source of confusion for folks is when we're talking compliance, they say, well, you got Lee Avenue, it's a steep slope, how can you make that compliant? The federal and state requirements are that you follow the grade of the road. So you can't change the topography, you can't change the grade of the road, but you need to keep the sidewalk following the grade of the road to the degree you can, and then you focus on cross slopes and the ramps in and out as your means of providing accessibility.
So it could be compliant and still not be accessible?
Well, I think that it will be accessible for those folks that need to use it. Folks on strollers, hearing impaired, seeing impaired, they could still...
Wheelchairs would...
depending on the type of wheelchair, there are some that can travel down slopes. You know, it depends on the degree of slope, and also there's those that are assisted by others that would then have access through this sidewalk.
Thank you.
Next, I took some snapshots. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this because you come here at least on Mondays, if not many other days as well. The goal here was to formalize the de facto sidewalk that we'd created in the parking lot and also provide access through ramps from Philadelphia all the way, basically to connect a sidewalk from the Philadelphia side by the library all the way through the back of the building and around to Grant Avenue. So the before pictures you see there at the top, that's the sidewalk where we made it accessible and created a pathway from the Philadelphia Avenue sidewalk onto the back of that sidewalk. And then, of course, the bottom picture on the left-hand side is, we used to have wheel stops that were stopping the cars, and then the asphalt was the pathway. We established a sidewalk there that's 4.5 or so feet wide. On the right side of that, you see some of what we combined a project. When we have the opportunity, of course, we try to look for stormwater improvements along the way. This location behind the Computer Learning Center has been the site of some stormwater concerns since the construction. In particular, that section of the driveway takes a lot of runoff and drainage from the back slope towards the school, and we have a difficulty keeping the inlet free from debris and clutter. So what we were able to establish in the section that used to be all asphalt, a big square of asphalt, is we created an infiltration basin. You'll also see that we created an infiltration basin for stormwater at the intersection of Philadelphia and the parking lot. So in those areas, the asphalt's been removed, the soil's been excavated to a depth of about 4 feet. We put in drain lines that connect to the existing stormwater inlet and then filled it with appropriate soils that allow for water to travel through. And then we'll be planting these with a combination of appropriate plants and some of the rocks and stone and protective measures that we use. So in those two areas, we've added infiltration basins as part, not part of the speed camera, not paid with the speed camera fund, but while we had our contractor out there and we're aware of the situation, we added those elements to the project. And you'll see that the sidewalk continues from behind the library across behind the Computer Learning Center and then ties into the existing sidewalk behind the behind the community center. And then that takes us over to Grant Avenue. Did extensive work on Grant Avenue in combination with the Housing Division and the creation of the basketball court. I took a picture from the green roof. Basically, you'll see that on the right side, the before there was even the basketball court, and to the after. So we've really changed the functioning of that side of the building with the addition of the basketball court, the addition of the sidewalks, and improved the accessibility. On the left-hand side, you see that there used to be no sidewalk that would take you from the Grant Avenue side into the Grant Avenue doorway. Now we've established a compliant sidewalk that takes you right into the building, and also established a crosswalk point across the street into the school. So our daycare providers, the city's recreation department, and school functions can identify that as the crossing location for students and children. Next, we did an extensive amount of work on the Piney Branch school side of Grant Avenue in consultation with the school. These photos don't really come out well, but any of you that have walked it before, the school side of Grant Avenue was a nightmare compliance-wise. No ramps, hard curbs, multiple driveway entrances, and a real difficult place to walk. So we've widened the sidewalk, we've flattened it out, we've got smooth crossings across all those different driveway entrances, and we had a pinch point there. You see in the middle, stop sign, utility pole, fire hydrant. There was nothing that we could do there, but we did widen the sidewalk on either side of that, so the feeling is that you have more space. Even though the pinch point still remains, you have space both before and after it to get across. And because we had painted on the street there a narrowing of that exit point for Grant Avenue as you're crossing on your way to Maple, we formalized that with bumping out both sides of Grant Avenue in that location to provide planting areas as well as really well-defined crosswalk locations for people to use. And then the final picture you see on the right side is we added a sidewalk across the front of the city building parking lot and along the wall of the green roof deck there and up into the Grant Avenue side. So we established a walkway there. Then we moved into the North Tacoma neighborhood. Some of the photos that I selected here was to try to point out some of what we're doing relative to trees, and also to point out the issues of, on the before side, on the left side, one picture right on top of the other, you see the curb ramp situation that was existing. The slope is too great on the way up. The crosswalk is limited in terms of you can only cross in certain sections. It doesn't provide the crossing at the location where you'd want to cross if you were coming across the street. And then the after pictures, we've added the curb ramps, we've lowered the sidewalks, and in one case we put in a back curb. In the other case, we haven't yet, but we'll be coming back to put in a back curb there at the Tacoma-Albany intersection. And then I just took a photo of some of the work that was done up that street on Buffalo. Is it Buffalo? Yes, on Buffalo Avenue. In cases where we encounter trees or there are trees nearby, we've moved the location of the sidewalk over to accommodate some more space for the roots, as well as to allow us to go up and over roots that exist, and that's just a picture of some of the brickwork that we've done in locations where we've encountered trees. We also have a fairly detailed set of requirements that we require the contractor to follow when they're excavating around trees. There's certain limits on the equipment they can use and the way they can remove existing sidewalk so that we protect the roots beneath. We don't allow mechanical excavation, backhoe or bobcat buckets. We require that they excavate by hand. And then they have to identify roots, and if there's any root that's greater than 2 inches, the arborist has to come out and make the determination as to what can happen there once we've exposed it and see it. And if there's roots that are less than 2 inches, they have permission to cut those sharply with a pruner or a sharp spade and proceed. Next is some of the work we did near the J.K. Park and Montgomery College. We were able to, you see on the far left side, we had a sidewalk with a pinch point. I think it was about 26 inches there around the utility pole. So what we did in that situation, we actually moved the curb out about 1.5 feet to provide the required, actually just a little bit more than the required passageway around that utility pole. And then the others you see are the intersection right at the location of Albany, Fenton, and Tacoma Avenue. We had situations there where we didn't have curb ramps on all sides of the intersection, and we also didn't, some were not existing and some were incorrectly located. So we were able to add curb ramps at each intersection on that four side. In the middle, you see as if you're looking from JK Park across Fenton Avenue, we were able to create a crosswalk across that side. And then the far right is as you're standing at the college and looking across Fenton, you see there's folks standing there on the bus stop. We didn't do anything with the bus stop. That was fine. We were able to add a curb ramp further below and make sure the sidewalk transition was appropriate. And now is the work that we're doing here on North Tacoma. Some of the points to note, you see in the first before and after, all the before pictures are in the top row, the after pictures are below. This is the first picture is the corner of Cleveland and Baltimore Avenue. So an interesting situation there. There were a few very small, inappropriate trees that were located in the right-of-way, some Bradford pears that had been planted, I don't know, 5 or 10 years previously. Those were removed, but we had a very large tree in the private property yard directly adjacent to that sidewalk. And I don't know if any of you have been there, but the sidewalk was also up quite high from the curb, so it was elevated. What we were able to do once we removed the sidewalk, we wanted to move the sidewalk out and around that tree, and so we moved the sidewalk over to the curb. As we were doing the excavation there, we didn't identify any roots relative to that tree, so we were able to drop the sidewalk elevation so that it could smoothly transition across that property at the corner. And it worked out very nicely. The next photo you see is right at the intersection of Baltimore and Philadelphia. There again, we had a situation with, as you see in the top picture, a utility pole square in the middle of the sidewalk. So in that situation, the utility pole is still there. What we did was move the sidewalk out and around it. Narrowing the intersection, the process, and sharpening that curb so it provides a little more distinction for vehicles traveling, turning to the left there, as well as people turning in from Philadelphia, and providing a clearer sense of where you can cross Baltimore Avenue at the intersection of Philadelphia. The third photo is the corner of Baltimore and New York Avenue. There was a subject of quite a lot of discussion from the community relative to the two trees and driveway crossing that you see there. So again, it was a situation where we had a lot of pavement, wider pavement than we needed. So what we were able to do is we entirely located the new sidewalk in the existing street, and we eliminated what had been sidewalk, turning that back into ground and soil and backfill. So we just relocated the sidewalk further into the street and provided a greater margin between those trees and the sidewalk itself.
So in that case, we actually removed sidewalk from the roots and
yes,
created a more permeable surface on top of it.
Directly adjacent to the trees, yes, yeah. And then we put the sidewalk in the street where, because we were working above the grade of the street, we didn't have any issues with running into anything. And we didn't expect to find roots there, and we didn't. The last set of pictures, again, it's one of those things that's hard to capture unless I were to set something on the driveway ramp. But this has been a challenge that we found, particularly in the North Tacoma and on Baltimore Avenue as well. And one of the reasons why we're replacing work that was done not too long ago. When the work that was previously done, we allowed driveway aprons to exist sort of in their current configuration or location, particularly with slope and grade. So the sidewalk kind of ramped down into the driveway apron and ramped back up again, so the transition was much too sharp and steep. In this case, not only did you have sharp transitions, but you also had, in some cases, 20-degree slopes that the driveway aprons were coming in, and yards that were raised in the process. So in those cases, we did a number of things. The top picture is the before, obviously, and the bottom picture is the after. In many cases, what we did was we raised the lower section of the driveway to try to catch up some of the slope there. We lowered the sidewalk coming into the driveway on both sides, so we dropped it down a little bit. So we tried to sort of meet in the middle by raising the driveway apron and lowering the sidewalk down. Some of the challenges had to do with the meeting the driveway itself beyond the sidewalk. So in those cases, we worked with the property owners, particularly if we were needed to take some of their driveway out in order to slope that transition so there wouldn't be a lip or a bump up from the sidewalk to the driveway. And we had probably 5 or 6 of those right in the Baltimore, Albany, Cleveland area, and each of them worked out very well. We had a lot of cooperation with the residents and just really able to greatly improve the way the accessibility across those driveway aprons now. It'll help everybody, not just those that are impaired, make it a much smoother walk across that area. And I think that's the end of those pictures. I guess maybe I have 5 again and turn it off. The next section, I was just going to talk some about the current projects that we have ongoing, as well as what we see doing for the rest of this fiscal year in terms of these capital-type pedestrian safety projects. As many of you know, we started this fiscal year with a request for design and engineering services for traffic calming in the Ritchie, Oswego, and Geneva Avenue areas as a result of the situation with Montgomery County and our neighbors directly outside the city in the Sligo Park Hills neighborhood. So we have a contract with Sabre Long and Associates. You see the design charges there. The rest of the costs are totally hypothetical at this point, as we haven't made any decisions about what's actually going to be installed. It's just taken a crack at what we think we can anticipate spending. We've had one community meeting in the middle of October where the design engineers presented options to the community and got a lot of feedback and a lot of discussion, and they're refining their proposals and are set to give the city 30% drawings for us to then move forward with and determine what we'll be installing in that case. We've had one current speed hump installation that we anticipate doing on Sherman Avenue as part of Council's recent approval. In terms of the ADA sidewalk work, we're continuing in North Tacoma. We're currently on Baltimore Avenue. We'll be moving to New York Avenue, and then we'll be crossing over Philadelphia Avenue, working on Boston Avenue and the 7800 block of Tacoma Avenue. We anticipate that work will be done through November, which will then pretty much stop our work for the winter season. And then we'll start back up again in the spring. And the goal to make some sense of the ADA compliance project with existing sidewalk is basically to start in one corner of the city and work our way down and through so people can sort of see we're coming and notice that there's some logic and progression to our work. So once we finish in the North Tacoma section above Philadelphia Avenue, we'll move to the Hodges Heights neighborhood. There's small sections of Grant and Holly where we need to do some compliance work. And then start in the Old Town neighborhood from Holly to Park Avenue and do that section before then moving further south into the adjacent neighborhoods and on down into basically Eastern and New Hampshire Avenue, work our way through that corridor, and then we'll come back up. The reason we started in those areas was that's where we had the most existing sidewalk and the highest range of noncompliance because of the age and type of sidewalk it was. So we're trying to make improvements in the areas where we have the highest number of violations per the tool design evaluation. So again, the cost figures there are estimates at this point. We know what it costs us for a month of design engineering and inspection services. The construction costs can really go all over the place depending on what type of work they're actually doing. In some cases, we have to do a lot of curb and gutter work. In other cases, we're not doing any curb and gutter. We're just doing sidewalk and ramps. So it's a real mixed bag. And as I mentioned in those Baltimore photos, sometimes we have to do driveway aprons, which are more expensive because they're greater depth of concrete. So we're looking at some costs in there, assuming somewhere around $500,000. In terms of new sidewalk design, I showed you some photos of the small section of Lee Avenue that we've completed. We're also anticipating potentially doing some sections of new sidewalk on Boston Avenue when we go there with the ADA project, and we've been working with the neighborhood just recently did a meeting and a survey of the neighbors in the block of Boston Avenue from Tacoma to Chicago about adding new sidewalk on the Silver Spring Intermediate Park side of the street, the south side of the street. There's currently a small section of very narrow asphalt there. There used to be some real tree conflicts in front of that park. Unfortunately, a lot of those trees are now gone, so it's opened up some opportunities in terms of sidewalk locations there. Based on the survey responses we're getting, there's a lot of support for adding that sidewalk on the south side, and we'll be working with Councilmember Josh Wright on finalizing the plans for that when we're there doing the ADA work. We're currently in design on sidewalks in Ward 6. We have a contract with a firm called RKK and Associates that we probably signed in September 1st, I believe. And they've been doing survey work and evaluation and basically creating base maps for a number of streets, including Wildwood, Kirkland, Kennewick, Merrimack, Lockney, Holton Lane, and Erskine Avenue. Those are the ones identified as the Tier 1 sidewalks from the tool design evaluation. So we've asked them to take a look, create existing condition maps, and then start the design work for what would potentially be the most logical place from an engineering and pedestrian pathway connectivity framework for sidewalks on those streets. And then we'll start the community process, raising the issue with the folks who live in the neighborhood, getting feedback. I mean, ideally, depending on the complexity of the project and support from the community, we are anticipating having the first community meeting in November, perhaps even December, and then basically being able to prepare and move forward with construction in the spring. And then the next set of sidewalks that we anticipate getting through within 2011 would be in the Ward 2 area. Those streets would include Boyd, Lincoln, the 7300 block of Jackson, Larch, Elm Avenue from Lincoln to Sligo Creek Parkway, and Auburn Avenue. The anticipation there, we don't have a contract signed or a design engineering firm on board at this point. We pretty much have ourselves spread pretty thin at this point, overseeing the existing design work that's going on. But once we get through the Ward 6 design, then we'll, and the Ritchie Avenue and Geneva Oswego project design, then we'll start up the design for those Ward 2 streets. And anticipate it following pretty much the same process where we have an engineering firm on board that creates base maps and logical pathways and then starts the community process. So there we're assuming we'll just get into the design phase before the end of the fiscal year. Lastly, there's an Ethan Avenue Gateway project that the Housing and Community Development Office has presented to you previously as part of a community legacy funding project. Basically, the Speed Camera Fund would create some matching funds for a project there. And the project would include ADA improvements, additional lighting, and landscaping amenities in the commercial area. And there's a portion of the funds that would be coming from the speed camera and the rest coming from that grant funding. And I guess as we find out whether or not the grant's been accepted, they'll give us updates and we'll proceed depending on the schedule. I think that particular project has a pretty tight time frame in terms of expenditure of funds once they're awarded, so that would then get on a fairly quick fast track for design and construction. And that, I believe, is pretty much what we're looking at for this fiscal year. We do have, we are working our way through this and kind of learning as we go. It's pacing and the complexity of these projects is sometimes hard to predict, but, as we come up with a better sense of how fast we'll be making progress, we can continue to update the council and the community about what we anticipate, particularly in light of the new sidewalks, which I think has got a lot of interest for folks.
Okay. Thanks very much. Councilmember Clay.
Thanks for all the information. I think that the sidewalks that were installed along Flower Avenue did a good job with those. The one down at the base where Flower and Garland meet, it's a sidewalk that was installed there, and the retaining wall wasn't installed for a while. And I don't know if the people in the house knew what was happening, but the neighbors didn't, and they asked lots and lots of questions. So one of the suggestions that I would have would be to kind of communicate more to people, not just on the affected property, but around about that, because then I think, it takes away, people start complaining and they sort of get, and they get this momentum around griping and complaining about how awful it is that this is happening, and it spreads out to the rest of the community, sort of like a toxicity that enters the community. And if you could stop that with more communication, I think it'd be helpful. Your slideshow is really terrific, and it's I haven't seen all these spots before. You just presented them in the slideshow, and it's great to have all the different examples of the challenges that you've met and the ways that you've been able to resolve them. And I think making that more accessible to these communities who are about to do this, and have a site on the website, look at before and after pictures, and take what you've got and probably make a really clear delineation of this became this, everything on this side's before and everything's after. I think that would be really a great educational and outreach tool for people who are concerned about what it's going to look like and have questions about those things. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I've been talking to Craig and anticipate that. He's got most of the other pieces of this, just not the slideshow.
Great. And, I would love to take the people from a couple of my neighborhoods around and show them what these look like. And we've said before when we've been traffic calm, you want to see a raised table intersection, go look at Tulip and Maple. And if you want to see example of where they closed off a piece of the road, I can't remember where it's at, but it's somewhere in Ward 6, and did that, it'd be great, just, get the bus and drive people around and show them even just a sampling of some of the people in the neighborhood so that they could share that information with others would be, I think, really helpful, especially in neighborhoods where people have a lot of questions and hesitations. About the Community Legacy Project, I think it's been a couple years since we talked about the sidewalk at Ethan Allen and what I think must be the 700 block, where those townhomes are, and there's the Eastern Market and then the other houses. So that sidewalk comes along. At one point now, someone has covered part of the sidewalk has now become asphalt. I'm not sure what that's about. That's recent. But you come along down to the entranceway to the townhouses before you get to Eastern, and it's a curve like this. And so Mrs. Hill isn't around anymore, but my across-the-street neighbor, who's one of the most daring older people that I've ever met, would just take her electric wheelchair and plow against traffic in Ethan Allen, because if she got down to the end, she couldn't get off the curb, and it's quite a ways. She's not around anymore, and I don't know of other people who are doing that, but when you're talking about a place where we could really use a curb cut, if the community legacy thing doesn't happen, it's a major intersection and access point for people, and then sort of the same thing back up the other side when you get around to Eastern. So even if you couldn't redo the whole stretch or all of the corner or anything, just being able to have a curb cut there would really improve the accessibility quite a bit. So if we don't get the community legacy, I think the community legacy money wraps around that corner, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If we don't get it, I would hope that we would consider that, just that spot essentially separately, because it's pretty important.
Councilmember Wright.
First, I just sort of had a question of, so you've been at it a little while, and is there anything you've learned or do you plan to do differently as we move forward, both with new sidewalk construction as well as the upgrades and addressing the ADA issues where the sidewalks are there? Things that you've learned you think we should do differently as we go forward, or any of that sort of stuff?
Well, I think we just have a better sense of the length of time it's going to take in a project and a little more appreciation for the complexities of it. I think we've been working and tweaking our public notice, so we're getting a little bit more information there for what people need. I think in your neighborhood, the walk that we did was helpful for those folks that participated. It probably, in an ideal world, would make sense to be able to do, come out and we'll walk around the neighborhood and answer any questions you have. In every neighborhood we go, and we can make that a part of the process. In some ways, it's a little bit tricky with timing, because if our design engineer hasn't been through there, we don't even know what we're going to be doing yet. So we have to. It's a little bit disingenuous, because we've already had to start the design process before we even get there, if we want to, speak to residents with any real clarity about what it is we're going to do in specifics, because people appreciate the general, but what they really want is specifics. What is it going to mean in front of my house, and what's this going to mean to my driveway or my lead walk? So I think in those ways, always communication is key, and the more and better we can do that will help. I think that if we can figure out a way to collaborate together with you on the council to access the listservs and some of that community information, that can help to give, reach some people and give a background to those that maybe didn't get the flyer in their door, or they just don't read flyers in their door. It helps to sort of legitimize and kind of give a little bit of alert, a heads up, hey, this is coming. So I think, if we could make more use of that, though I do, see that it has its limits too, and there's really no escaping the sort of door-to-door nature. I think if I ever underestimated the importance of our design engineer and our inspectors, that's been reinforced, tenfold, because they're there, while the contractor is there, and they probably do more public education on a daily basis than we do with 100 flyers, because, they're able to directly address people and point out what we're doing and give it real specificity, which is helpful. So that's been a real critical piece, to have folks that are aware of the technical nature of the project, and then also able to communicate that to residents in a door-to-door kind of way. So I think, it's been a little more challenging than I would have anticipated. And so that's a helpful thing, because it kind of gets you up and running a little faster. Your learning curve is a little steeper than it might have been otherwise. Those are kind of the things that most come to mind. We're certainly open to suggestions, and one of the things that's a challenge is we have to keep our contractor moving. We have to keep, we sign a contract with the design engineers for a certain amount of time, so we have to balance that with the need to provide enough education, enough, outreach, and enough discussion with the community. So, some of that I think we've been learning as we go, and we're getting better at it. But it will continue to be a challenge, because each neighborhood will be a little bit different.
Just a couple comments to follow up on that. I agree with Councilmember Clay. I think we need to over-communicate in every mode possible, right? So we probably have an opportunity to write a newsletter article, again, about what's happening, what's going to happen, and also kind of explain, because I think people still don't get it. They say, well, I look at that sidewalk and there's nothing wrong with it, or I look at that ramp and I don't see anything wrong with it. So really explain the ADA a little bit more, then do flyers some number of months out, weeks out, and then people really pay attention when all the markings are on the sidewalks, right? So we should sort of just plan okay, we know the markings are going to be down roughly this time, so let's schedule a walk around. I think, you're not going to make all the people happy all the time, regardless of what you do, but I think in aggregate we can do a little bit better job in communication. And I think, we heard from a lot of people who were unhappy about the process, or didn't agree with the approach related to the trees, but we didn't hear from a lot of people who have been complimentary in conversations you might have in a community meeting at someone's house that Bruce and I attended, or
a father of a kid at my school recently, so I think, there are lots of compliments that people are happy about. But I definitely think as we move into Hodges Heights and Old Town, from my perspective, to the degree that we can really over-communicate, I think that would be helpful. And maybe we could walk through some, tricky spots so I can understand what's going to happen. In particular, I think about on Maple on the western side of the street where it's a very short sidewalk and you have a lot of ramps that are, driveway aprons that are basically non-compliant 20, 25 degrees, but there's not the same space that exists on Baltimore to address the issue. So just thinking about how we're going to handle those things would be helpful. I'm curious about the Ritchie, Oswego, and Geneva Avenues, and just wanted to recall, where is the count, because all of this stuff was being put in, and we were considering the no left, no right turn sign, all as a restriction, all as a result of what was happening in the Sligo Hills neighborhood. They haven't made any changes there yet. I heard some comment that it may be delayed indefinitely, and so I'm wondering, what's the connection between the two? Are we doing, do you guys have clear direction from the council that we would do this regardless of what happens in Sligo Hills, or what's the understanding around that sort of stuff?
Well, I think that's still a matter that needs to have more thorough discussion. My understanding is it was created as a reaction to, for lack of a better word, the traffic restriction that was going to be installed. My understanding through the design engineering firm, which the folks that are doing the design engineering for this were also the folks that did the design engineering with the county and stay in touch, that at first it was referred back to the county attorney for some further evaluation. They have now allowed it to proceed, but they've widened the outreaches of the neighborhood, how far the neighborhood has to do their petition process. There is a final petition process that the county process requires. So they're currently in that, the originators of the original request are in that process now to get petitions signed from the scope of neighborhood that's been included, and the county required it to be wider than it originally was. And so pending the final collection of the required number of signatures on the petition, it will either then move forward because it's been approved, or if they can't get the required number of petitions, it will not. And I think the issue with the traffic calming in Ritchie and Oswego and Geneva, it is an area that was identified with Tool Design as a need for sidewalks, and we do have some community amenities there that require a greater look. The combination of the public works facility as well as a community park and a daycare center are located in that area, and so there's certainly a need. Whether or not the council would have decided that was higher priority than another area for traffic calming, I think that's something that I anticipate needing to hear from you once we get a final answer from the county.
Okay, so we'll be hearing back before we would go forward. We would go forward then. Great. Want a second Councilmember Clay's request for the curb issue along Ethan Allen. I've heard from Roberta Wright, who's a constituent of Councilmember Clay's, but I interact with related to the District 20 Democratic delegation a fair bit, and that's been mentioned to me a couple times as a trip hazard and a problem for people along there. And then lastly, just want to sort of raise the question of when we originally were looking at doing the ADA and the improvements over building new sidewalks, some of it was that engineering was more expensive and time-consuming. And now that we have the numbers around that, it looks sort of like 40-60, 33-60, a third, two-thirds in terms of engineering. Construction, just kind of eyeballing it, maybe even a little bit higher than that on the engineering side.
We don't have much by way of actual expenditures for new sidewalks. Most of the costs that you see there are work we've done in existing sidewalks.
Right. So I was saying based on what we're seeing in the work on existing sidewalks, it looks like one-third, two-thirds in terms of engineering to construction, maybe even a little bit heavier, maybe like more 40-60. And whether we still feel like based on what we've learned on those costs versus engineering related to new sidewalks, would we really continue to prioritize the repairs of and ADA upgrades over building, engineering and building new sidewalks? Because I know there's many neighborhoods and communities within Tacoma Park that don't have sidewalks. Ward 1 has a lot of sidewalks, and so I realize a lot of the investment is being made in a neighborhood that already has sidewalks. And really, just questioning whether that should still be the priority, or whether we should maybe shift and prioritize getting the new sidewalks built in some of the other neighborhoods and come back to the stuff later on.
Darrell may have some thoughts on this. I think part of the challenge when we were talking about the tour design study is once you have non-compliant sidewalks, and those have been acknowledged, and the city has knowledge of that, which certainly, if you look at all the tour design studies, it's all over the website. You do have a legal obligation to have a plan in place to systematically address those issues. I think as long as there is a plan, there can be some balance between new, but certainly I would have concerns if all we did was focus on the new and ignored, I think, the problems that are documented. So I do think we can strike a balance between both new and solving existing problems.
Yeah, and I think my opinion would echo that of the city manager. Design work for new sidewalks will probably exceed the construction, just because of the nature of the work itself, and we have incredibly low unit fees for our construction work. The prices that we pay for a linear foot of curb and gutter is really, really low. So I think that it'll probably be reverse 60-40 for the new sidewalks. There's also a really long lead time for new sidewalks, so if you're invested in a program of new sidewalks, it'll take a while before you actually see anything happening. So we're trying to work in retrofits while we're having design occurring so that we can, show activity on both fronts.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, thank you, Darrell. This has been extremely helpful. I appreciate the long lead time on the construction of new sidewalks, because that's what Ward 6 is all about. We don't have very many, because I've seen the RKK surveyors out there for weeks and weeks trying to locate all the things that they need to identify so that they can get a really good base map. And I appreciate your clarification about the Oswego-Ritchie thing, and that I think that conforms with my understanding about how we were going to go forward with that. I also just wanted to second Colleen Clay's suggestion to get those before and after pictures on the web, because I think with new sidewalks, even more than the replacement of old sidewalks, you're going to run into real sensitivities. And I think you already know that, about people who sort of say, yeah, we want new sidewalks, but not on my side of the street. And then we also have some of my constituents that are not very pleased at all about sidewalks in general, as you also know. And at some point earlier in your remarks talked about using, where you have tree roots, brick and, what is it, rubber?
A rubber tile, it's called TerraWalk.
Have you installed any of that?
We've got a small section on Manor Circle and another small section on a couple locations in Westmoreland Avenue. They're best suited for areas where you're going to have straight shots, no curves and bends. And a lot of what we end up doing is curving sidewalk around things, and for that we use brick. There's really, that's the best application.
Well, if you could include pictures of that, I think, because I anticipate that that's going to be the case sometimes along Wildwood Drive and along Erskine. Perhaps, I don't know, but I think I've tried to reassure my neighbors that that is something that the city engineer is definitely going to be being able to take advantage of. And also, one other thing, and this is a little off the subject of sidewalk, but it does have to do with the use of speed camera funds. I think you had mentioned to me that on Wildwood Drive, that long block between Kirkland and Ann, that this fiscal year there was going to be paving of that stretch because of the WSSC work that went on, plus a speed hump put into that stretch as well. Is that still the schedule for?
Yes, a section of Wildwood and I believe Jackson Avenue are on the paving schedule for this fiscal year. And so we've been assuming that we'll dovetail the sidewalk construction because we do curb and gutter prior to street resurfacing. We'll join those two projects.
Oh, okay, so that would probably mean you'd be doing that in the spring.
Yes, they'll
Okay.
coincide.
Okay, good. I don't think I have any other comments or questions.
It looks like nobody else does either. Thank you very much. Yes.
As I just going to mention, if you started adding up the numbers and looked against the budget figures I gave you, they don't add up. You may recall from the budget discussion that it was really unclear at that time what the impact of the change in state law was going to be, and that was before the council had approved the installation of 2 new cameras. So probably after the first of the year, once Darrell and I talk, we certainly have a better sense of some of the capital projects. We will be coming back with a budget amendment for you.
Okay, good. And now we have the currently occupying the last spots, council comments and city manager's comments, and so we'll go to council comments. Councilmember Clay.
Let's see. So, in happy news, I'm having a Halloween party. It's Saturday night. You're all invited. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's at my house from 6 to 10, though most people don't show up till around 7. I have a band. The band is called Ladle Fight. They're a group of junior high kids who played at the Folk Festival. They've played a couple other years under a previous name, but their new name is Ladle Fight, and they've even been featured on NPR by one of the intern projects there. So, as part of the hyper-local music festivals. So we're going to have lots of good things for kids. I know there are some parties around where kids aren't welcome, but kids are always welcome at my house, always. And they're going to have sort of their own space and their own mini party going on. It's potluck, so I hope you'll all come by at least to say hello. And the other comment I already covered with the sidewalk activities. And then the other comment, I think that Councilmember Wright is going to have some things to say. He sounds like he has a little more information than I do, but I've received several inquiries from parents at Piney Branch Elementary School, my child's child at Piney Branch Elementary School, because the construction project that we heard about, I think it's been about a month ago, the kids will spend a year without any access to play space other than the blacktop. And a lot of the parents are concerned about that. A lot of kids really need to have some green space to play on. I know the city manager knows something about meetings with the Montgomery County Park and Planning and maybe the school district and has more information on it. But it's a concern, and I would be interested in helping find a resolution that works for folks.
Councilmember Robinson.
Not much. I'm very grateful that the lights aren't blasting down on us tonight, and I look forward to continued nights with this. It sounds like the quality of the broadcast is still adequate, so I'm hopeful they don't come back on, or if they do, in a different form. I don't have much to add right now, except I see that on the 14th of next month, Ziegler Park will be dedicated at 1 p.m.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. Just wanted to commend the Boy Scouts for putting on a wonderful pancake supper last Saturday evening. It was a great community event, and it was my first year being able to attend. Very tasty pancakes and a line out the door. So the other thing I did want to comment on is the issue that Councilmember Clay raised already, which is the play space behind Piney Branch Elementary School. There's a significant project, park renovation that's being undertaken behind the school, which we all know about and got a presentation a couple weeks ago or a month ago. In that presentation, it wasn't clear to me that the extent to which the play space would be limited for the children. I understood it to be that there would be a space for them to play in that was not just the blacktop, and that would be cordoned off, and they would do the construction on the park, and then during the summer they would come back in and finish that section of the park. It's come to my attention through a number of residents and families who have kids attending that school that the space would be limited just to the blacktop, and I find that to be unacceptable. Many of the kids who are in the school who are now in third grade were in second grade last year, and they lived through being bused to Grosvenor. That facility at Grosvenor had pretty limited outdoor equipment and play stuff.
Well, it wasn't a school for that age. It wasn't originally built as a school for that age kid.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So just to continue to have those kids have very limited options to be able to play outside is unacceptable to me. And I've heard different people say, well, we should at all costs do away with the skate park if we had to make sure the kids had play space. And I don't think it has to be an either or. I don't think the interests within the community need to be pitted against each other in that way. The skate park has been something that's been talked about for a long time, and I think is needed in the community. And if I recall correctly, the project actually came in under budget. And so I'm sure that there can be a solution. It might cost a little bit of money, but there can be a solution to figure out a way to both preserve a space that's adequate for the kids to play in, as well as allow the construction project to continue in a safe way for the children. That may mean putting something down on the field that heavy equipment can drive across without damaging the sprinkler system, or it may mean that you let the heavy equipment drive across and the sprinkler system's damaged, and then you pay money to repair it afterwards. But there, I think, are options to cordon off a larger play space. Like Councilmember Clay, I'm willing to have those discussions to help figure out. I very much appreciate the city manager and the city staff already investigating and working on this issue and helping to facilitate some of those conversations. I do want to clarify one thing. There was a rumor out there that the city actually somehow has veto power over this issue. And I want to be very clear that we do not. As many things that affect us, it's a county issue. And the county school system has some say in this matter, and the park and planning is really the one responsible for the project. So, as usual, the city will go to bat for its residents and exert its influence as it can, but I would also encourage people to reach out to their county council member, Valerie Irvin. I know I'm going to contact her about this very soon, probably tomorrow. And also reach out to your school board members and put pressure on park and planning to resolve the issue, because I think it is resolvable in a way that's beneficial, again, to the kids, and to have the park construction continue in a way that will still meet the timeline.
Councilmember Schultz.
Just want to speak to the residents of Ward 6 to inform them that the city's Department of Housing and Community Development has initiated a concentrated code inspection process for the ward, and this means that the code staff are going, starting at the pretty much at the northern end of the ward, working their way street by street, property by property, looking for possible violations that need to be abated. And what they're doing is simply, at this point, handing out courtesy notices to give people an opportunity to fix the things that are picked up by the staff. They've already done a number of streets already. So far, very, very few complaints about these courtesy notices. These courtesy notices don't carry any consequences, but clearly, when a reinspection is done and the situation still exists, then then real notices will be handed out at some point in time. Don't know how long it's going to take to complete this, but I do think it's something that our ward definitely needs, given the condition of some of the properties in our neighborhood. So, but I really welcome it. The only other thing I want to mention is that we had a successful New Hampshire Garden Civic Association yard sale, the first one, and there was a number of people that came out to get rid of their stuff, and a bunch of people that came out to buy their stuff. And so it was on Saturday, and it turned out to be quite a success, and I'm told it's going to be done again in the spring. So that's good for our neighborhood. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councilmember Clay and Councilmember Wright adequately discussed the problem with the renovation of the fields at Piney Branch Elementary School. I would just like to suggest that this council submit a letter to Park and Planning Commission, outlining our concern and asking for some relief. Thank you.
Okay. And I've just got a couple quick comments. I wanted to make sure my colleagues, if you wanted to take a chance to look at this letter that came from the City of Hiroshima about the Peace Memorial Ceremony and partnership with the City of Hiroshima and all that they do to try and recognize what we need to do to keep a peaceful world. If you read Japanese, you'll even be able to see better what they're talking about, but there's also English there, and that comes to the city because of our nuclear-free zone. Remind folks that this Friday, the 29th, is the ribbon cutting for the fire station, the new fire station, and that's this Friday, the 29th at 12:30. Saturday, the 30th, in addition to, I think it's the 30th, is the city's Halloween costume judging and parade up at the site of the farmers market, and that starts at 4.
I'm not sure.
I think
the parade's at 5.
I think that's right. I think that
30 minutes before that or something like that.
It's in the 4 to 5 range, and that'll be on the website. And people should remember that early voting started on Friday, and in addition to voting for various candidates, there's also the ballot question, which the city council took a unanimous position on, which is to vote yes on question A, and that is the ambulance fee. And the city's position is to support keeping that as the county council enacted. And then I just wanted to say a few words about the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Conference that was last Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in Annapolis. 6 out of the 7 of us attended. I think there were some mixed reactions to how valuable it was, but I think generally people felt it was quite valuable. And one of the interesting things was the program that's being started in Maryland called Sustainable Maryland, based on Sustainable Jersey, and the program that they're undertaking in New Jersey. And it's a program for municipalities to help communities invest in a more livable tomorrow. They had some interesting presentations, some interesting information, and it's based on kind of a lead scoring system with various attainment levels, and it's just getting going. I am now signed up as a founding mayor of the Mayor's Advisory Council on this, and there's the promise that there could be some money for some sustainable initiatives, and this should tie in very nicely with our Task Force on Environmental Action report that we're continuing to discuss. The folks at that program were very excited to have us on board. They felt that in many ways we were moving through a number of these items that could be recognized for sustainability, and that we might in fact be the first ones to attain some of the levels in the program, and they wanted us to be there, and I think those of us who talked to them about it were very excited about it. So we see some real possibilities there. And I think we're now to city manager's comments, and then we'll be finished.
Mayor, in answer to your question, the costume contest is at 5 and the parade is at approximately 5:45 Saturday. I just wanted to give you a very brief update on the Public Works renovation. Darrell, feel free to jump in. I think overall it's been going pretty well. We've had a very good working relationship with the contractor. Found out today we have gotten most of the building permits we were waiting on from Montgomery County. There's an issue with WSSC that we still just need to do a little bit of work on, but all in all, things have gone pretty smoothly. As you may recall from the bid award, we had negotiated an extension on bid alternate 1. This was something we had not accepted because there were concerns about the lack of contingency for the project. The contractor and I had worked out where he would give us, I think it was 111 days. That date is fast approaching. We will be talking to the contractor about seeing if they can work with us to extend that time frame in order to elect whether or not to do that bid alternate, because we still have a lot of site work to do. And I think as more tenured members of the council may recall, anytime you're doing work in the dirt, there's always a chance you're going to run into problems. So we will be trying to talk to the contractor about that issue, and I'll give you an update at the next council meeting. But we'd like to try to keep that option alive as long as we could. That's it.
That's it? Then we're adjourned. Thank you all.